All right, welcome back. This is the Something Ventured podcast. I am Kent Lindstrom. I am your host. This is part 2 of my conversation with the entrepreneur, Peter Berger. This is part of an ongoing thing I've been doing, trying to talk to entrepreneurs about their journeys. Some journeys are kids from college start something in their dorm, and it becomes a hit by the time they're out of college. Great success, not a great story. And some journeys, most journeys, are more interesting and more complex and far less direct. And Peter Berger has certainly been on one of these on his way to the current success he's seeing at his current company. In any case, this is part 2 of my conversation. Something Ventured. Thanks for listening. Yeah, so if it's like, if you could have any person do anything you want, you're like, oh, I don't know. But, you know, caviar, the rest is like, do you want to order food? That's us.
Yeah, and I think that, TaskRabbit was very interesting for its time, and I think the challenge with being one of the early experimenters is you know, they had a marketplace, they had bidding, so the TaskRabbits can really value their time. It wasn't very structured, and it wasn't, I'm cleaning your house for $40. And by the way, HomeJoy's gone.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of ones who didn't make it, even though there was an inkling of positivity in that. And I think, frankly, the next kind of wave of victimization for these companies is going to be in the food delivery service. There's a lot of different models that are out there. Some are being successful, some are being less successful. I don't know. I don't know the numbers.
Yeah.
But I know that a lot of capital for Spoon Rocket and Sprig and Munchery and Zesty and a bunch of others, all of which I've used, are, you know, and Caviar, which is another one which I haven't, are all out there. And I have no idea because, you know, services and food tend to be very low margin businesses. So you have to benefit from the economy of scale. Otherwise you're tough. Right? You know, same thing for sort of all commodity type stuff.
And I would say those things are a pretty thin layer of, I mean, for 40 years, you've been able to pick up a phone, call a local pizza place and have a pizza delivered. So the fact that you can do it, as opposed to, I mean, Uber, I think emerged as soon as, well, not as soon as, but once you could kind of, we can locate the car and we can locate, you know, it's running on top of a new technology, which is the maps and the credit card that you're comfortable putting into your phone. It's doing a bunch of things that are like really different, like hopping out of a car versus like messing around with how much was that, and, can I shove this through?
And my credit card machine is broken. I can tell you, I have so many stories about bad taxi experiences, and I have no stories about a bad Uber experience.
Right, and even
or Lyft.
Right, or even be generous. Say taxis are fine, like that they're the lovely people and all
you're
that.
You're being generous.
Exactly, for the sake of argument. The concept in LA or somewhere at least, that you go to the street corner and stand there and wave until a car happens by is really inefficient, as opposed to like you have a device that tells the taxi where you are, and then the taxi comes to where you are.
Oh yeah, and you create this whole system where you can allocate resources effectively. You can do heat maps, so you say, okay, we need more vehicles in here. I'm going to provide different incentives for the drivers to be someplace versus some other place.
Right.
And frankly, I've worked with companies that are looking to make public transportation more efficient. And if you look at public transportation systems that currently exist, they are terrifyingly antiquated.
Yeah.
They make the air traffic control system, which is very antiquated in the United States, look ridiculous. You look at the subway system in New York, it's still working on manual switches. They have no real data.
Yeah.
You look at the Muni system in San Francisco, they still use clipboards. That there was a whole sort of infrastructure because they don't have an official radio system. They have no idea of why things are working. And that's municipal. Then you have a private agency that can come along and actually apply real data science and efficiency to travel, and it's going to be massively disruptive, regardless of the trade guild of taxis creating additional complexity, alleging safety, by the way.
Yeah.
I've never been inside a safe taxi. Most taxis are friggin' terrifying.
Yeah, the one angle that I heard from somebody that was pretty good, but it was like, well, we're regulated, so we have to provide the taxis for disabled people. But I'm like, well, Uber could just do that too.
Yeah, and well, how about this? If it's just like a public hospital, if taxis are such a public service, then why don't you just run handicapped taxis?
Yeah.
That's it. And then the rest of the taxis can just go off in the graveyard and die.
Yeah, Uber's got enough money to say, hey, we're always going to have two,
And sure, if it's not economically viable, guess what? By the way, this is what government's supposed to do.
Yeah, right,
if it's
right.
not commercially viable, then you can make it a government function.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the whole point. It's not commercially viable for private companies to constantly build roads all through the United States. However, having a very good setup for road infrastructure, excellent idea. How about a bunch of us get together, businesses and private people, and build roads? Hey, welcome to government.
And you know what? Which one seems a lot more subversive to me is actually the Airbnb, which is that they're encouraging behavior like people having hosting people in their homes and kind of seems like they're kind of encouraging people to run hotels almost out of their house. And there was recently a big controversy in San Francisco about, is that okay or not? And there was this sort of, well, it's my house, I can do what I want.
Yes, and I think that there's a massive property. I think that there's a larger property rights issue baked in there that people aren't really getting to the fundamental point, mostly because the main controversy is not I own my own home and I can do whatever the bloody well want with
Which
it.
Which is not true, right? You can't open a restaurant in your home just because you feel like it.
That's true.
You can't open a nightclub. You can't kill a guy. I mean, a lot of stuff you can't do because it's your house.
I think renting a room and murdering somebody. I think there's a big step. I mean, there's slippery slopes here. And
it's good radio though. That's why.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It's like, well, renting a room and liking Hitler, same thing.
Well, okay. On a practical matter, though, in my building, 3-unit building, I don't actually want somebody to go, it's my house, and be renting out. They're giving out the key to the building to other people who are on vacation, who are, maybe going to be a little louder. And I don't want to see random people just walking in and out of my building. I don't know what right I have to that, but it doesn't seem right to me.
It just depends on what your status is. If you're renting, then you have limited rights. If you're owner and a tenancy in common, you actually have pretty significant rights because that person's damaging your, what they call, air quotes, quiet enjoyment of your property.
Oh, that's good. Quiet enjoyment.
Yes, it's a term of art, as they say.
I like it. So, what in talking about these the Silicon Valley companies, people coming here to make their fortune, thinking they're the next Mark Zuckerberg.
California and the gold rush. It's just different gold rush every year.
It is pretty funny. I mean, that is, the author Ben Stein, also an actor.
Yep.
Bueller, actually a pretty good economist. And he kind of makes this point that if you think about the people that would be in California, historically, the people who were in New York were the people who weren't okay staying in London, so they went further. The people who, then went to the Midwest were the people who didn't want to stay. People who just keep pushing further and further.
Yes.
Eventually, you get to the coasts, people go up into their heads, and that's Silicon Valley in the north and Hollywood in the south.
Well, I'd say that we're outcast adventurers and frontiersmen. That is kind of the DNA of San Francisco.
Yeah.
And what does that mean commercially? It means risk takers. It means the outsider. And the one thing that I've always admired about Silicon Valley, which is a bit different than Hollywood, because I think Hollywood focuses on putting you in the machine. There's the good old fashioned like Hollywood machine of what was Marilyn Monroe's original name? Norma Jean.
Yeah.
Norma Jean gets off the bus and they're like, oh, you're kind of cute. Let's put you in this and make you this and we'll change your name. What happens in Silicon Valley is that you'll have somebody that is from bumblescrew nowhere, whether it's Turkey, Syria, India, Indonesia, Poland, London, Sweden, and they will come here and they will be the complete outcasts in the town that they were in. They were very intellectual. They liked very, very different things. They were usually a bit of a troublemaker. And then they come here and they go, oh, these are my people.
Yeah, right.
These are my people. People just do stuff here. And it's really remarkable. And I'm so pleased when people have that experience. I mean, networking aside, the Silicon Valley machine aside, I love people coming here and having this drinking from the fire hose experience of everybody is talking about their ideas. Nobody's just complaining about working at the factory.
Yeah, that is true. And I think you do get comfortable with the level of risk, although it's really not risk in the sense that if you've been working at IBM for 30 years, you get fired. It's very different from if you're trying to find a new job every 6 months, and so you're deeply in tune with the market. And I've talked about how if you meet people in, I won't name cities, but around the world that aren't in Silicon Valley and they're kind of being entrepreneurs, and you meet them, you're like, oh man, you're not playing the game at the level. And I can name 5 companies that are doing exactly what you're doing, and you haven't heard of them, and that's not good. And you're doing it, but you're not, it's just like if you're sort of a finance guy somewhere, but you're not, knocking against the other titans of Wall Street. So I'm like,
Right. But I think it depends on what game they're playing. If you go to other parts of the world and you see these companies and they're playing their local game, usually they're playing it exceptionally well.
Well, that's fair.
Yeah, but if they're saying that they want to play the Silicon Valley game and they're not here, what happens? And I've seen this through a lot of foreign, kind of incubator type operations. They'll bring these people here for a couple of weeks and they'll just be deer in the headlights. They go, oh my God.
Yeah.
People can pull off in a week what I can't pull off in a year.
Yeah.
And it just scares the stuffing out of them, but in a good way a lot of times because they realize they have to up their game. The analog to that is what I call the Steve Jobs problem. Getting back to a prior point, that everybody says, "Oh, well, my idea is still amazing," and they really stick to their guns because the legend of Silicon Valley is you can come here and be successful. Anybody can do it, just like being discovered in Hollywood when you work at a restaurant. But that you have to stick to your guns because people are going to always tell you you're wrong. Mm-hmm. There's a gigantic asterisk of context there because people say, oh, Steve Jobs this and Steve Jobs that. Steve Jobs actually had hundreds, if not thousands of people supporting him particularly by the time we get to iPhone space, that he's got billions of dollars behind him and a very long track record of success.
Yeah.
And so people might have been saying no, but his downside risk of failure was pretty low. I mean, he wasn't going to lose his houses. He wasn't going to lose all this sort of stuff. And you get people that come here and they stick to their guns regardless of how much information is thrown in their face about not just sort of the intricacies of how they might be incorrect, but the glaring obviousness of they are on the wrong track and this is poorly constructed and they need to just basically throw this in the trash and start something new.
Yeah, that's one of the things I'm not sure how it happens. And I contrast it to traders on Wall Street who pretty quickly don't exist if they're not making money. Like there's some point. It just seems like there's so many companies where I look at them and listen to what they're doing. I'm like, it's not going to work. Like you're not the radical one who I just don't get it and you're going to kick my... And I'm, later on, we thought we had something we didn't, we're winding this thing up. There's so many companies like that where it's like, and there's also companies where you meet them, you're like, that sounds crazy. I don't think that's going to work, but I don't know, maybe it will. And it just seems to me there's so many of these companies and there's something that lets people fool themselves longer here than other places. Like kind of, maybe it's the capital structure or whatever, but there seem like a lot of... So when people go, oh, your thing's not going to work, there's a couple stories where somebody overcame it, but most times they're like, it's not going to work.
Well, unfortunately we're kind of back on like our prior conversation, so we're sort of like too scripted at this point from our pre podcast notes. The one thing that I always limit myself in doing, and it's not so Silicon Valley has a problem with the never ending maybe. That people always want to hedge their bets and they want to say, well, this might work, so I'm not going to tell this person no, but this is certainly not a yes for me.
Yeah.
I don't think that's really helpful, and it's never been helpful for me. It's not particularly any guidance, because what people are coming to you for is, I wouldn't say guidance, but they're trying to get closer to the truth. And what is the truth? The truth ultimately means success. Like you're truthfully helping people. You're truthfully building a good company. And when people come to me and I think, well, this is not a particularly good idea, but what I always try to do is point out contrary cases. And I say, you should look at this, you should look at this, you should look at this. But I'm not going to tell somebody you've got a bad idea because what the fuck do I know?
Yeah.
Like if I was that smart, I wouldn't be on this podcast. I would be buying Richard Branson's Necker Island and telling Richard to, GTFO.
Oh, geez, is that for sale?
Hey, if I had enough money, it'd be for sale. Everything's for sale.
Everything's for sale.
Yeah. My co-founder Kate had this really good expression, and I hopefully I can rephrase it. It's honesty is expensive. Don't expect it from cheap people.
Yeah, interesting. Well, my sense is not, and I didn't necessarily mean, no, your idea is bad, because at the idea stage, everything's genius or stupid. I mean, it's like somebody comes to you and you're like, hey, I launched this product and like all my users, like nobody's using it, but I'm sure if I just added these 5 features, somebody would use it. Like they're clearly getting data that's telling them that,
they're not doing the right thing.
Yeah, it's like, Steve Jobs didn't launch the iPod and everyone went, yeah, I need an extra button, and this is too hard to use. And then he added 5 more buttons, and it worked.
Right.
And so it's more like that, where people are clearly getting data that's at least contradicting their initial idea, or they don't really have a clear picture. Like they thought they were going to launch it, everybody was going to love it. That didn't happen, and the word of mouth was going to spread, it was going to grow. That didn't happen, and they don't have an alternate theory of the case. Like, I guess I need to figure out like a SEO strategy or an acquisition strategy that's paid.
Right. Well, I think in those cases, there's always 2 alternatives. It is adjust the path that you're on. So I'm getting bad data about. I mean, this is the Instagram story that they were doing something that just was not working particularly well, and they said, "Hey, look at what Semantic's doing. Let's do that, but in a slightly different way, i.e., free." Which hey,
that's exactly what happened.
Welcome to understanding the market opportunity and just deciding to have a slightly different business model.
Right.
So you're saying, look, there is a market, and I'm coming in with a different business model. So I'm not reinventing all the wheels. And I think that when you have people, they're saying, look, I'm not getting good data. My company's not working particularly well. Sometimes it's just circumstance and personality. The people just aren't getting traction because of who they are and what the time situation is.
Yeah.
But other times it's, all right, do I modify this and say, look, I'm getting close, but I need to sort of shift it to the right or shift it to the left? Or is it the Instagram situation where I just lob it in the trash can and try something else?
Yeah. Yeah, and his backstory now is that, people were using the crap out of the photos in this, what was a meet your friends kind of app.
Yep.
But I think a lot of it was, a lot of it is like, look at something that's working and, make a couple adjustments.
Right.
Uber arguably looked at some things that Lyft was doing and was like, yeah, that's kind of a cool model, that ride sharing.
Yep.
Maybe not with the fist bumping for the business people,
Yeah, of course.
And, hey, now we, maybe a little more, maybe we want to sit in the back seat, and all of a sudden, a star is born. And of course, Lyft is doing fabulously well now.
Yeah, I just saw that they announced a deal with General Motors.
Yeah.
$500 million.
Which I think, by the way, is common. Like, I thought the driverless car was kind of ridiculous. Just from a legal, I was just like, well, the first time someone gets hurt, and all those stats and all that. But the more powerful people and institutions kind of get behind it, and the fact that California's future it's not going to be a train between LA and
I was just looking at that, saying that the high-speed rail between Los Angeles and San Francisco is, from my point of view, just a gigantic government boondoggle.
Absolutely. For sure.
Land reallocation, government boondoggle, putting together a bond initiative, and it doesn't make any sense to a bunch of people in Sacramento who are just lining their pockets.
Yeah, and I think history, probably with the, figuring out driverless cars and all that, may just make it irrelevant. Just in the way that some places just jump over having landlines for phones or cell phones.
Oh, of course. The entire continent of Africa, except for a few exceptions on the north and southern coasts, they just completely bypassed it and went straight to cell.
Yeah. So I want to talk. I don't want to linger here, but
sure.
Your path to Silicon Valley, as many paths are, is somewhat interesting. I mean, I took I started in finance, and I was at Deloitte & Touche, and then kind of figured out that running a company or working with creative people was something I really like. You kind of took a path to get here.
I believe the route is called circuitous.
It's a big word.
$5 word today. Yes, everyone scream when you hear that again in the podcast. Yeah, circuitous.
Exactly.
So I started off as a freshman at California Polytechnic State University. My father was a civil engineer who said, you know what, engineering is the way to go.
Yeah.
I spent about 2.5 years trying to grind my way into an ME degree, and decided that after I finished all my calculus and all my other science requirements, I just didn't want to do that anymore. And that I wanted to be an advocate of some sort. I just wanted to sort of stick up for people. One of the things that I've always liked doing in life is sort of generally being an advocate and also making things.
Yeah.
One of my favorite jobs I was just out of high school before college. I worked for Zahn Guitars down in Redwood City as a sander. And they were my first real job. Yeah. I was legal, and they were great. And I worked there for the summer, and I greatly enjoyed it. I just, would put on my sanding gear and just sand wood all day and, get my paycheck and go have fun with my friends. And it was a job, but I loved making something I could show at the end of the week. There was a thing that I had made.
Right.
So decided to go to law school and went through law school at Rutgers, Newark, one of what they called the People's Electric Law School.
Whoa.
And it was great.
Did you go in the 60s?
There was still the People's Electric Law School. Lots of public interest. We had a student body that was over half women, a huge number of minorities there. And it wasn't just simply because it was admissions based. It had a lot to do with the type of people who went there. It wasn't very business oriented.
Yeah.
It was public service and litigation and things like that. We had a few people that ended up going to big firms.
But the noble version of law.
At the time, yeah. At the time, yeah. We had some great people working there, and I ended up deciding to become a public defender. So I did a clerkship in the appellate clerkship, and then went to work for $37,500 a year at the Newark Public Defender's Office, with a little stop in Atlantic City defending gambling cheats.
Wow.
And I was 27 years old, 26, 27, 26 years old. Unclear about what birthday it was, but I was the youngest person by a decade in the adult serious crime felony group. So nobody showed up unless they were looking at 10 years plus.
Wow.
And I tried my first case in a month before I'd never tried a case or anything like that. And I tried my first case a month into it. Won. Yeah. And it was a 3 strikes case.
Wow.
Guy was going to go down whole life. He was a life sentence if I lost.
Wow.
So,
and so does this did it just make you hate people, or did it make you and what is when you're doing this, is it, you're defending, are you saying hey, I'm the guy who's making sure that the downtrodden in society aren't screwed by the state? What's the
so the two things,
in addition to the 37,500, what's getting you up in the morning?
What's getting me up in the morning is I was and still have my moments of idealism. And the charge is the zealous advocacy of my clients at the time. And my attitude was, if I do my job really well and the prosecutor does their job really well and the judge and the jury work really hard to do a good job, the likelihood of a correct outcome is very high. Okay. If anybody's a slacker, we're going to get it wrong. Right. So let's do this. And my attitude was, for my 250 clients at any one time, was there's probably not one person that has stood up for these people in their entire lives. Yeah. And there's somebody's child, there's somebody's brother, there's somebody's father, and I'm going to be the one person that's going to stick up for them. And I'm just going to crack as many heads as I need to in order to get a good result. Yeah. And sometimes that's even with your own client, that you have to have a very, very serious conversation saying, look, this is not going to turn out well for you. Right. If we take this all the way to a jury verdict, you are not going to get the result that you were hoping for. So let's do a deal. And 90+% of everything that I did was essentially what I call being a used car salesman. Yeah. You're sitting down and you're doing a deal. And when I would talk to younger prosecutors, because I was trying cases 3 years before my classmates started. Everybody else, I was the public defender, and everybody else that was coming through the prosecutor's office, about 6 or 7 of them, they were my classmates. I ended up doing a bunch of their first trials, kicked their asses, but I ended up doing a bunch of their first trials. And as they were sort of coming up, I would say, look, about 80% of the stuff we're going to just agree on, and it's a matter of price. It's a number and whether or not we can work a number. And there's going to be the rest of it, we're going to just never agree on. So let's not screw around with the stuff we're arguing about price, and let's just realize that that's a different part of the business, and let's focus on the real controversies and put our efforts into those real controversies. And when we're dealing with price, we'll have to be a little bit more sanguine about realizing that, look, it's about macro justice. It's not about, quote unquote, each one getting it perfectly right, because we just don't have the capacity. Right.
And so why aren't you doing that, sir? Or how do you get there to the next stage of
things? When I was a few years into it, I just realized that I wasn't going to be able to do the job for my entire life the way I wanted to. I wanted to 100% commit. I wanted to be able, if I had an idea at 3 o'clock in the morning, I wanted to go and do it. And I just realized that was not going to work. And to be really frank, you get to the point where you realize that your moral construct might be an overly vacillating scale. And the moment that I knew that I was leaving was about a year and change beforehand, because I had a customer or a client that was pretty regular, and he essentially, he and I were having lunch. It was a lovely day. And I was thinking, oh, this is actually quite pleasant. And then I realized that this person was essentially a contract killer, that I had represented him when he had nearly crushed his girlfriend's skull in. His 5-year-old son from that relationship was wandering around just being generally happy. I know that he had actually murdered somebody 2 weeks beforehand that I personally knew. And I'm just going, you got to get out of here. This place is just too weird. So I wrapped up, and he was a terrible person. And like I said, it wasn't as if I enjoyed this person. I just had this sort of moment of contentness and realized that I should not be content at this moment.
Right.
And so I wrapped up all my completely terrible cases that I just didn't want to leave on anyone else's desks. And October 31st is my New Jersey Independence Day. Packed up my car and just left.
Wow. That's great. And not an uncommon Silicon. There you go, right? Bringing it back to heading west. And
just heading west and wanted to come out here and build things and do something different. And my first company, funny enough, I started with a bunch of friends who were over at Columbia. And we ended up having this large-scale bio-network integration company called Alator Systems. We did some fun projects looking at disease.
Sounds like a Michael Crichton novel.
It was really, really fun. We're looking at basically modeling drug efficacy in diseases in silica. So you didn't have to wet lab it, and it could be much, much faster.
Why don't we wrap up with your, how are things going with your current company?
We're doing well. So we have grown our team. I believe we're at 6 or 7 right now. And we're focusing.
By the way, this is a great, so people all over the world kind of listen to this podcast, and part of what I try to do is
really? All over the world?
Well,
excellent.
like places like, like Dublin, Singapore, like you don't think about it. Podcasts are...
That's true.
They work everywhere. And so I think they listen to it in a sense to get insight into what Silicon Valley's like. That's a great company size, is all I want to say. 6 or 7 people, at least for us. Boy, you get a lot done with like not a lot of friction if everybody's on the same page.
Yes. I actually really do enjoy it. I ended up, the team is great, mostly engineers. We're doing direct enterprise B2B sales right now, learning much more about the product, getting a lot of high touch in with customers. We're trying to add a customer about every week.
That seems like a lot.
It is a lot, actually. I'm realizing that it's maybe a bit much for us, so we might have to do a capital raise relatively soon. But they're great. We really love our customers. Hopefully, we're adding a lot of value.
And are you in the phase of kind of learning for like, oh, geez, we got to fix the thing on the thing from your customers?
Oh, yeah. Something's broken every day.
Yeah.
But the grand scheme of things, it becomes less broken on a day-over-day basis.
Right.
And the software becomes more efficacious every single step you get. And that's the real fun part about it is you fix something and then you see people happy with the fix.
Right. And then they got the next thing. And then you do that for long enough and all of a sudden you're like, this is pretty good.
Right. And I think that goes back to our prior point about when somebody has a company and they have a product and they're like, oh, people aren't really using it. What do you do? Yep. Do you scrap it or do you sit down with the people who are using it and they say, well, you need to sort of move it to the right here and you need to move it to the left there. And it depends on who you are and what your product is and what you're doing. And we're selling to business development and salespeople. And they know what they want to get out of it.
Right.
Their ROI is, I want to be able to close deals more effectively, more efficiently. We don't provide a whole bunch of different leads. That's not our operation. We provide a lot more information about the stuff they already have, which ultimately is the highest ROI for them.
Right.
Because they spent tens of thousands, if not millions of dollars building these relationships over their careers and the lifetime of their corporations.
Right.
And why aren't they selling more to these people? As opposed to this marginal email that just came in because you bought it from data.com.
Well, if you're actually adding customers at this point, you're ahead of 99% of other companies.
You can always add them faster.
Exactly.
More customers, higher dollar amounts. That's the goal.
Well, so what happens next for you guys? Is it hiring more people? Is it capital raise time?
I think so. What we're trying to do is we're trying to get a sustainable sort of growth metric so that the growth metric, we're going to need to hire more people as that growth metric gets more intense, because what I'm doing right now is essentially triple duty of, full on management. I'm doing a bit of product because every day I'm down with customers and I have direct communication with every single customer I have. FYI, not scalable, but very, very helpful.
Right.
And I'm, doing the sales cycle, and, we're going to need to add people to help us with that. And in order, once we sort of get this whole, how do we acquire customers? How do we onboard them? What does our sales script look like all the details of that. That's when we got to get, we get capital in the door, and it's going to really help us become a much larger company.
So should we, why don't we wrap up? We should make sure people know how How do they get in touch with you? On Twitter or email? Wherever
So the easiest way to get me
phone
is...
number?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know.
The easiest way to get in touch with me is at peter@getcontactiq.com. If you're interested in potentially using our product for your business development or sales organization, you can just go to getcontactiq.com and request a demo or email me directly. I'm completely open to either option.
Right to the CEO.
Right to the CEO.
Cool.
That's the advantage of listening to this worldwide distributed podcast.
It is worldwide. Hey, thanks for doing this.
Hey, thank you for having me.
All right. Thanks a lot. This has been the Something Venture Podcast. I'm Kent Lindstrom. Thanks for listening.